Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and start. So let's just take a moment to set our motivation, kind of refresh our motivation. Um, we won't do a full meditation, but at least just a moment of calm before we begin. And so just spend a minute or two focusing on your breath. So as we've seen already in today's teaching, even though we might have very lofty goals, such as the mind of bodhicitta that wants to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all beings, unless we let go of our attachment to this life, we won't achieve anything in that direction. We may even create more non-virtue than virtue. We end up wasting this life. I often use the analogy of going to a island of jewels, beautiful paradise where there are jewels everywhere, and we can take whatever we wish. If we were to come home empty-handed from such a quest, it would really be such a waste. Well, we're on that island of jewels right now with this perfect human rebirth, having all the conditions we need to be able to practice the Dharma. But if we continue to follow these patterns of attachment, these 8 worldly concerns, we won't benefit from this life. We won't actually extract the essence, the meaning of this life. So with that thought, we can set our motivation of bodhicitta, wanting to do this work today to become more aware of these 8 worldly dharmas, to learn how to cut off desire so that we can attain these greater results, especially our own complete enlightenment, so we can lead all beings to attaining that same state. Okay, and then you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. So again, and let me see if there were any final comments or questions from the first topic, the first pair, attachment to material gain, things, and craving to not be separated from those things. We had some interesting talk over lunch about that. Yes, Danny, please. If you can unmute. Yeah,
I put it in the text because I'm actually better at writing than I am at speaking. But Shayla and I were talking on the phone after, and I realized that I am still attached to what we were calling digital Dharma. It's difficult to imagine not having the texts, not having access to groups like this, to have internalized all that and be without the so-called props. And that's the hard one. That's a hard
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
yeah. No, that's very true. I mean, and certainly when it comes to things that are there for our good and benefit, the texts, the center, the teachings, all of these things, these are certainly fine things to have a good feeling towards and to be taking care of and making sure that we do continue to have all of that in our lives. But there can be an attachment to that too. We have to be kind of careful around that. Um, I mean, I don't remember hearing the exact reaction, but there were certainly some Buddhist teachers who I heard when that happened back in, it was in Afghanistan when the Taliban came in and they decimated, destroyed these beautiful Buddha statues that go back, thousands of years, right? You know, and uh, many teachers were kind of like, oh, it's just impermanent. We can't be grasping at all of these things. And I'm just using that as an example. And moreover, we have to be sure that we're not attached to our path as well. Lama Yeshe would write on this frequently or teach on this frequently about how we have to be careful that we don't have this strong attachment to my way is the way and everyone else is wrong, and this kind of mentality that comes with Dharma practice sometimes. To be kind of open to recognizing that, yes, this is what we practice, this is what we honor and admire in our own tradition, the texts, the statues, whatever, and all of that that's there to help us. But we don't get so bent out of shape when it's not there, or when other people contradict it or do other things that are different, to watch our own minds and make sure we don't get bent out of shape. We just keep true to our own compass, our own practice. So thank you for bringing that up. That's very true. We can certainly let go of a lot of things, but sometimes it's hard to let go of the Dharma and let go of the texts. Yeah. Any other comments? Thank you for that. Yeah. Anyone else? Let's carry on then. Let's move on into the next pair. Get my slideshow going here for that. This was this pair that is really the tough one. It's interesting. I think I had a conversation quite a few years ago with Venerable Rabina where she said, this is the hard one for her at least. And I think it's the hard one for me to some degree too. We have this strong desire for everything to be comfortable, to be having those pleasurable experiences, and to avoid anything that is discomfort, uncomfortable, unpleasant. Let's see what Lama Yeshe or Lama Zopa says about this. Why are we so obsessed with comfort? I highlighted that sentence on this page because it is true. Our culture is very much about everything being comfortable, everybody having exactly what they want when they want it. And then he says, for example, many of us are extremely attached to food. Milarepa warned about attachment to food, calling it a spy of Mara. Mara is the term they use for these kinds of demons. There are external demons, but there are mostly the demons that are in our own minds, So the spy of Mara, this food that kind of, I don't know, spy, I can't quite figure the exact connotation of that word here, but certainly it's something that draws us into potentially having great attachment, great um, desire for these comforts of having good food. He says that the enjoyment of good food tricks us into generating more and more attachment. Food is one thing, but certainly there are many things in our lives that bring us sensory pleasure that we enjoy, that we partake of. And once more, I want to emphasize, I'll get a slide in a bit from Rinpoche in reiterating this. The problem is not the pleasure. The problem is the attachment to the pleasure. But it's very hard for us to separate those two out. Just like in our relationships, it's very hard to separate out love from attachment. Love is the genuine wish for the well-being of another. And so when we are in a spirit of love with others, then the concern is about the other person. It's not about ourselves. With attachment, though, it's very much about what are you doing for me? It's all about me and my needs and feeling like the other person has to fulfill that. That's one way of delineating them, but it's still hard. They're usually mixed. We have a love for the person. Yes, they're a wonderful person. I feel very good about them. I want them to be happy, but they better not screw with me. They better not go against my wishes, or else it's a whole nother story, right? So that's the tendency we have, is the attachment is still there. It's very hard to have, we use this term, unconditional love. Unconditional love is pretty extreme. It means that that person could do anything and you would still have the same feeling in your heart for them, the same genuine concern for their welfare. So I think it's the same with these objects of attachment. And there is a pleasure that occurs by virtue of hearing nice music or eating good food, enjoying a movie, whatever the case might be. But we usually have a mind of attachment overlaying and getting mixed up in it, kind of making it all about us and our experience of that. We're going to talk in a little bit later today about some of the techniques that help us to get out of that self-centeredness. Because if this is one of them that actually does show to a large degree how much we are under the control of that, we call it the self-cherishing mind often, the self-centeredness. It really becomes totally preoccupied with our experience, totally about what can I get for me, for my comfort, for my enjoyment. This word comfort, it's kind of an interesting one. Because we see, if we look really closely, how many of our decisions throughout the day are all about comfort, all about like trying to have everything just right. I kind of call this our inner Goldilocks. You remember Goldilocks and the Three Bears? She was all about finding everything to be just right. So you had Mama Bear, Papa Bear, Baby Bear, and they all had a different size bed and a different soup and different whatever. And she was like, oh, this one's just right. This one's just right. We want everything to be just right. And this is an obsession for a lot of people, right? I mean, some of you know I had strep throat earlier this week, and I was out at the urgent care clinic, and there was a man, a few people in front of me in line, and we were all waiting to check in. I was getting really bent out of shape by how long it was taking for the people in front of him to check in, and started raising a fuss and everything. People don't like being uncomfortable. They don't like standing in lines. They don't like things that get in the way of their immediate pleasure of having everything go well. And I mean, I felt bad for the man because it's just like, okay, be patient. And that's actually what the people behind the counter were telling him. Just have to be patient. This is urgent care. We don't know how long people are going to take, to get registered, for them to get care, everything involved in that. If we live our lives with much more of that kind of openness to expecting that it's just going to be whatever it's going to be, rather than having an expectation it's going to be what we want it to be. It's going to go the way we want it to go. Just have to let go of some of that. But comfort and pleasure are a big one. I remember one of that very first teaching I ever had from Lama Zopa Rinpoche at Seychenling in San Francisco in the winter of 1996, December of 96. Um, there were two kids in the room that one man had brought in. He and his wife brought their kids, and the kids, like halfway through the talk, because Rinpoche would talk for hours sometimes. This was my first teaching with him, and I think he went on for at least 3 hours, 4 hours. And these kids were going, "I'm hot. I'm hungry. I'm, and it was just like such a perfect reminder of like, that's our inner voices. They were just giving voice to it by telling their parents this, but all of us were going through a similar kind of thing of like, I'm tired. My feet hurt. My knees are killing me. Whatever. I mean, this is the tendency, right? We have all of this attachment to comfort, everything needing to be just the way we want it to be. Teacher's not going too long, everything, being perfect, the sound, the temperature, all of that. It's a big one. Let's see a bit more of what Rinpoche says on this. I agree with Venerable Rabina that this is really the heart of so many of our problems. He says if we check, we'll find that this unhappy mind definitely comes from craving for transient pleasures, the thought of the worldly dharmas. Simple nutritional food is not enough. We want something delicious every time, and if we don't get it, we get upset and disappointed. Or as I said earlier, look at how upset we get if it's not to our liking. If we ordered something that's really supposed to be yummy and delicious, and when it shows up, it's a little cold, or it's overcooked or undercooked, or not getting exactly the food we want, or getting something that is not quite right becomes a huge problem in our mind. Rinpoche would always say, huge. I'm not going to imitate him too much, but he would really demonstrate how, yeah, I mean, things do get us totally bent out of shape. He says, then we're agitated the entire day from morning till night. Our whole house is filled with the experience. Lunch was awful today. I didn't get anything I wanted. It becomes a major tragedy. I mean, I don't necessarily love this phrase, but I think all of you have heard it as like first world problems, that we sound off on pretty frequently in our culture, where we get so used to everything being of a particular level that we don't recognize that a lot of the world doesn't even have it at that level. They are dealing with things pretty basic. I mean, just travel in India or Nepal or one of these countries that they're still struggling to try to catch up to the 20th century, much less the 21st sometimes. And you recognize how patient you have to be in the space of that, and how your expectations have to be thrown out the window. But when we come back into this kind of culture, well, then we don't have no problem kind of going to this level of saying, yeah, everything's got to be just right. Everything has to happen the way I want it to, because that's our first world experience and our first world expectation. We have a lot of extra suffering because of that too, right? Who sets those expectations? Just ourselves. There's nobody else that's setting them for you. If you go out and things don't go right, right, in quotes, according to that level of expectation, well, if you don't have that expectation, then it doesn't matter, right? Okay, so it took a lot longer to get lunch, or oh, my food arrived and it was a little cold, or oh, traffic was heavier than what it should be at this hour of the day. You let go of it. It doesn't really matter. We are the creators of so much of our suffering because of our clinging to comfort and attachment to those kinds of pleasures and everything going well. So we have to be very careful on this. This is one that is, well, they're all self-created, but this one I think we can see uh, how much we are creating our own problems. When we're obsessed with our own comfort and pleasure, we're easily disturbed. This is another fault that we can see around this mind of attachment to comfort and pleasures. Everything distracts and annoys us. Any little noise outside, any tiny insect flying around, every unwanted thing becomes a huge disturbance to our mind, the cause of great unhappiness. If we're totally obsessed with our own comfort, then everything becomes a problem. I don't know. Again, we go to places where this is going to be the norm, that you're going to have all these things. You're going to have insects flying around. There's going to be a lot of noise. And people always joke in the Tibetan tradition, we have this in our head from maybe it's a Western thing we've gotten set up to believe in, that somehow going to like the monasteries and going to these places of practice are going to be these idyllic, quiet, peaceful surroundings. And you go to like a Tibetan monastery, my God, you go to Kopan Monastery, and it's like totally crazy. There's monks debating in the courtyards and doing all these kinds of things and meals being made and all this craziness. You have to really change your expectations. I can't remember if it was Alan Wallace or one of them was talking, maybe Alex Berzin, about their first experience of going over to India and doing like what they thought was going to be a very peaceful meditation retreat. And there was like all the noises of the city that was below them. They're up on a mountain, but you could hear everything. I remember when I was staying at Kopan Monastery in Kathmandu in 2015, and there were huge festivals going on at the time, and man, it was so noisy, all into the wee hours, and you just have to, you go and you deal with it. That's just the way it is. It's not, what we would normally be used to here. But we do get really bent out of shape when things are not the way we want them to be. Just even the slightest discomfort can become a problem. If we expect everything to be perfect, this is that expectation thing, right? We inevitably get disappointed and our mind gets disturbed. For instance, some Western, he's talking about what I'm talking about, some Western tourists are shocked when they go to primitive countries like Nepal, where material conditions are terrible compared to their own country. Right? It does take kind of adjusting your mind to saying, okay, I'm living in a culture where they don't have all these comforts, these um, physical things that are a relief to experience in our country, but aren't all over the world. It's quite possible to be completely happy no matter what the external conditions, no matter how much noise there is, or how unfavorable the conditions are. This is the gist of it. Nothing becomes a distraction for the person whose mind is free from the thought of the eight worldly dharmas. Right? If you're not having that attachment to things needing to be on the favorable side, especially with regard to comfort and pleasure, and you're totally fine when things are uncomfortable and not so pleasant, then, as it says here, your mind's unworried, happy, stable all the time. You kind of develop an inner sense of equanimity. One example, probably some of you have heard this before from me, one example that I point out how much we have a resistance to discomfort is the middle seat on the airlines, right? Most of them have, larger planes might have like two seats on the end, right? And some in the middle. But most of them are 3 and 3, right? So you've got the window and the aisle. And a lot of people like window and aisle. And then you have the middle seat. There is nobody that I've heard of, unless you're traveling with somebody and you need to sit next to them and they're in one of those middle window or aisle, there's nobody who reserves the middle seat ahead of time, right? Like, I want the uncomfortable experience of sitting between two people, right? We just don't do that, right? And if you end up getting the middle seat because you came on board late or whatever, if you do Southwest where you end up in like the boarding group that's last, and you invariably get a middle seat, and you kind of feel awful that you've ended up with this horrible seat. It's just a plane ride. I don't know, maybe a few hours of your life. You're going to be a little uncomfortable. And yet people get really bent out of shape about it. So it's a small one, once more, but sometimes small things can become huge for people. So again, this is a big one to look at. Maybe we'll do a little reflection after we do this one. to see what our own experience is around this. Ah, that's it. That was the last slide. Let me kind of check in with folks and see what is this bringing up for you in terms of if there's something you'd like to share. Once more, there's no obligation. This is an invitation. But if there's something you feel comfortable sharing, sometimes it can be really, I don't know, kind of lighten things by bringing them up in a group rather than thinking about them on your own. Are there things that come to mind in terms of your own experience with comfort and discomfort, having those pleasurable experiences that you enjoy and avoiding the things that are not so enjoyable? Anyone online or, yeah, Frank. Um, Lou, get the microphone to Frank. Yeah, right behind you. Great. Thanks, Frank.
Sure. I was just going to say, in my experience, if you're having a good day and you're spacious and your stress level is low, you can put up with a lot of these things
Mm,
and they kind of roll off.
right.
But if you're having a bad day, everything is 10 times or 100 times worse than it realistically should be. I just noticed that with these kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the question sometimes is, well, when we say we're having a bad day, well, where does that bad day come from? Yeah. I mean, usually the bad day comes from having these experiences that are in that column. And we have the column of the things that we want to get and we expect and like to get. And then we have the things that we don't get. And usually the bad day, I mean, the bad day can start with waking up with a headache or with not feeling 100%, which happens, right? We not expected. And again, there's nothing written anywhere that every day of your life you're going to feel 100%. So we wake up and we don't feel so good, and then things start going downhill, and something happens with our drive to work or whatever we're doing, and then things get worse and worse, and then we lose our patience, so we don't really have much ability to work with our minds because we've already plummeted into this pretty dismal place. I think that definitely happens, but the goal of our practice, I think, is to be able to say, okay, today I'm not 100%, but that's okay. I'm not going to let it get my mind bent out of shape. Sometimes there are extraneous factors. Maybe we're even on medication that makes us more irritable or what have you. We can definitely have those things. But if we've got good ability to work with our minds, then we don't go down that path and we don't end up in a place where everything is going to be a trigger for us. Everything is going to be impossible for us to deal with. But yeah, Danny, please, if you wouldn't mind.
I wrote that in the text too. I have an issue that's been with me since I was born that makes me highly reactive to the point of like, really, really severe. And I
Mhm.
turned to Buddhism in order to deal with that issue. And not only is that issue much better, but I think I'm better than most average people at
Mm,
handling. Um, but I still feel it inside. I just don't express it as much. And even
yeah.
inside, internally, it's not as strong as it used to be. So thank you, Dharma. Thank you, Buddhism. Yeah, it's a good thing. Thank you.
No, and but you're doing the work, and that's the important thing, and that's why whenever I hear things like people thank me for the teachings I've given or whatever, it's like, but yeah, you're doing the heavy lifting. All I do is give you the words that the Buddha taught in my own way of delivering them. But really, this is really the test for each of us: is to what degree can we take these teachings and begin to apply them, regardless of what our situation is. If we have something that we've been physically conditioned to experience or mentally conditioned to experience, well, do we let that become an obstacle, or do we actually continue to be diligent in working with the mind to overcome these patterns? That's the hard work. That's where when we get to, hopefully I'll get to the end of my slides, Rinpoche ends with a whole thing about determination. It really depends upon the degree to which we make the determination every day that this is what we're going to do. And we're not going to do the same thing that we've been doing for countless lifetimes because we see where it leads. It doesn't get us there. And to share that old phrase, you know, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, essentially, you can buy into that and keep doing the same thing, keep going to all of these external things for your pleasure and trying to avoid the external things that will bring you displeasure. But that's not going to solve your problem. It's more insanity. It just feeds your attachment and your desire. and your aversion and anger. So we have to do the work ourselves. So I congratulate you, Danny, on doing that, and um, this is for all of us to do and to continue to work with it. And we're not all there yet. We're not all perfect yet. I know I'm not perfect yet by any means, but that's the job. That's the real work. That's what we're here to accomplish. So good. Anyone else, anything on this topic? Like I said, I think this is a big one. I know I sometimes talk about seeing other people who are going through this, but we always have to once more. If we see other people, like the guy I saw at the urgent care the other day, going through that, I have to once more use it as a mirror to kind of say, okay, I have that same mind. And like you were pointing out, Danny, you still might have the internal stuff going on, the tendency, the desire to like do that habitual thing. But it's important that we not do that we replace that with different thoughts, not just stuff it. I know that I've heard from some people who have heard Buddhist teachings, they say, oh, Buddhism is just about kind of suppressing your emotions. And it's like, that is not at all what Buddhism is about. Buddhism is about taking what we normally have and how we are framing it and looking at it through our own conceptual mind and changing it. And it happens with athletes, right? My gosh, we just had the Olympics and that. I can't imagine the amount of physical exertion and mental strain that people go through training for that type of competition. Right? My God, I had a difficulty doing the ropes in PE, that was like the extent of my, it was hard to make that kind of exertion, to be able to climb up the rope. But there are people who dedicate themselves day in and day out to pushing their bodies and their minds to unbelievable degrees. Why? Well, because that's what's kind of their motivation. I'm not holding this up as an ideal. I'm just trying to point to it as a worldly example of how someone can overcome a lot of stuff that other people wouldn't even want to deal with, right? Sorry, that's not my cup of tea. I'm not going to go straining myself to that degree for whatever, a gold medal at the Olympics. But, they are driven and they do things that are unbelievable because it is a bit of mind over matter. It is if you are able to work with your mind, you can do amazing things. On Buddhism, we're saying, yes, do that and do that to overcome the delusions, the real source of all your problems and difficulties. Use it to overcome the attachment that we have to these external factors and to really experience inner peace. I mean, that's the real hero. That's the real medal winner, in a sense, is if we're able to do that. We don't give out gold medals in Buddhism, but that's the real work, right? Anyone else? Any other comments before we leave this topic behind? Let's go on to the third pair then. When just on my own experience, I can see that the third and the fourth pair are not as relevant for me personally, though not to say that I don't have some attachment here, but these may be a little more distant for some people in my estimation. But again, every one of us is different. This is the good rep and the bad, trying to avoid people in general having a bad um, idea of you, thinking of you. One of the worst problems, Rinpoche says, that we ordinary beings have is attachment to a good reputation. Renouncing attachment to food and clothing is comparatively easy, but renouncing attachment to reputation is much more difficult. This is Rinpoche's assessment. As I shared mine, I mean, in my life, I don't know that it's as keen. Nonetheless, I have to admit that when Venerable Rabina was here, she pointed out to me how much I like to be a people pleaser. And we have to be careful with that. As Dharma practitioners, we're not meant to be irritating to people, right? This is not the goal of a good Dharma practitioner, isn't somebody who's going to be abrasive and annoying to everyone that they meet. But we have to watch. Sometimes we get into that pattern of just wanting people to like us, right? We want a good rep. We want people to think well of us. We have to be careful. I try in some of my counseling I do with people, I try not to be too conciliatory and to try to help people to see things a little more clearly. Venerable Rabina is very good at this. If any of you have done personal work with Venerable Rabina, you know that she'll rub your nose in it. She will actually, and she sometimes does that even in the course of a teaching, right? Somebody says something and she's very good about pointing out what is it that you're not seeing, what it is that you're not getting, and showing it to you very clearly. That's hard to do with any of us. I mean, I'm just saying me as a teacher, but any of you, you might see your people that are in your life and really want to help them because you see they're caught in one of these patterns. And to try to do that skillfully, especially to point out to somebody that what they're doing is not really beneficial for them. That's hard. I've had some fails on that where, I've tried to move myself into a category of don't think about what the person thinks about you, just think about what needs to be said. But I think that's hard for us. We do tend to have a culture that's very much about people pleasing, very much about making everyone feel well around us and feel good. But to what degree do we then ignore the things that really should be addressed? The elephant in the room, that is the delusions and all the crazy stuff that people do. I think to be a really skillful guide for others, not just a teacher of the Dharma, but a guide that can help others, means that you have to be able to go to that place of pointing out faults to people and not worrying about what they think about you. There's that story, I don't remember which Kadampa Geshe this was. The Kadampa Geshes were all of the Geshes that came after Lama Atisha that practiced mind training techniques and what have you. But the story is that some woman who had just recently given birth came into the monastery and went up to the head person there, the Geshe or teacher that was teaching, and said, "Here's your baby." Of course, I had nothing to do with creating this baby, but the woman did this for whatever reason. And he just took the baby and said, "Okay, I'll take care of the baby." And he kept taking care of the baby. Eventually, the woman came back and retrieved the baby. But this was like, he wasn't worried about what people are going to think that he had this baby as a monk or whatever that gave birth to a child. He wasn't going to worry about his reputation. He was just going to deal with taking care of the child, which was happening. I mean, how many of us would do that? Somebody came and knocked on your door and said, "Here's your child." I mean, again, now our reputation might not even be involved. Just the involvement of taking care of another being is huge. But if your reputation is at stake, if suddenly everyone in the monastery is going to think that you're a horrible practitioner because you've given birth to a child with this woman, and he had no qualms about it. Kind of points out again that if you don't have an attachment to that, then it doesn't matter. I think it's hard. I agree with Rinpoche, this is a hard one, but maybe we live in a culture that's buffered enough to where we don't experience bad reputations as frequently. We see them at the level of, these celebrity people and political figures and whatever. And when that's happening, and when suddenly somebody has to contend with their reputation going to hell because some word has come out about something they did some years ago or months ago or whatever. And that's happening in our political scene right now. And people clamor for that and they want to see faults in the other side of the political fence and make sure that no faults are exposed on our political side of the fence. And so we see certainly reputation plays a huge role in our society. We have to be careful in our own little circles, whether it be your family, your friends, your social life, your work life, your whatever community it is that you are involved in, your Dharma center. Yeah. Yes, do things in a way that makes sure that you don't upset people and make them really kind of trigger their own emotions. But also be very clear that there are times when we should be addressing things much more openly and not so worried about our reputation. I said Venerable Rabina, you know, many times she doesn't care. What was interesting though is I did hear her one time say she was comparing herself to Lama Zopa, not in a way of like, finding fault with Lama Zopa, but saying, Lama Zopa, he can teach all hours till, middle of the morning or whatever, and no problem. And she said, I have too much attachment to my reputation to do that, to teach so long that people will actually start getting a little bit annoyed and wonder when are they going to stop and what have you. So she does have it, I mean, in terms of what she's exposed in her teachings and what have you. But I think that we do tend to, in general, really kind of be wary about pushing things because we don't want to lose our good rep, right? We want everyone to think we're a swell person, right? Swell, that's a word we don't use so much anymore. Let's see what else Rinpoche says. Whereas praise and criticism are given us directly, reputation is what others say about us, right? It's the rumor mill, the what's going on, what do people generally say about us. It's more general knowledge, such as articles in newspapers about how we've done, or others gossip about us. Articles in newspapers, it could be even like Facebook comments, or it could be even just what you overhear, by people talking and saying this or that. And of course, we can get pretty bent out of shape when our reputation starts going south. Desperately wanting to be admired brings us many worries and problems, and they're all created by ourselves, right? A much simpler person is just going to go about their life not worried about what other people think about them. Do we need that admiration? Do we need people to have these thoughts that we're a perfect person or whatever? Gaining a good reputation, he says, requires great effort and expense. And then when we have it, no matter how successful we are, we're always worried that we might lose it. And nowadays you can lose a reputation even by people lying about you, right? That happens in our political arena very frequently. And suddenly everyone's trying to fact check and see, is this exactly what that person said? Is this what they did? And trying to confirm whether these rumors are true or not. It's a pretty vicious world out there. But if you don't have any attachment to it, and you don't care, people are going to say things. Why do we think, once more, I think this isn't more evidence of our default mode. Our default mode is that everyone's going to like us, right? Everyone should like us. What's not to like about us? Right? We tend to think that about ourselves. We're likable people. We all like to think we're likable people. I think Donald Trump likes to think he's a likable person. I mean, seriously, I'm not trying to throw any stones at Donald Trump. I'm saying we all have that as our default. We just think that we're likable people. Why don't people like us? So again, that sets us up once more for disappointment when people don't like us, when people think poorly of us, when we do get a bad reputation, when things are said about us that change all of that. We have to be careful, again, with our own thinking about that, our own default. The expectation, again. Expectations are a big part of these 8 worldly dharmas and why they become so problematic. And he says another thing that can play into this, even when we try to create good karma, and he uses the example like giving clothes or money to beggars, those are unhoused, who are on the street, who need our care and attention. If we do it out of a need for admiration, that thought of the 8 worldly dharmas stops our action from becoming positive. Even if you're doing it for thanks, for gratitude, like, oh, and that's a bit of more pity than it is kind of a real act of generosity. But if we, do something for somebody and they don't say thank you, and that happens a lot. They're not grateful. It's like they're not, then we feel bad, like they're not treating us correctly because we did something wonderful for them. Why aren't they appreciative of that? Right? That's a reputation thing, right? To some degree, that's me wanting to be thought well of because I did that. Whether it's other people who are witnessing it, praising it, or whether it's the person who we've been generous to. No, yes, when you're on the receiving end, by all means, be grateful to the people who do things for you. Who, that's perfectly fine. But when we are not getting that from other people, that's our own expectation. It's nothing that is a golden rule that everyone has to follow, or you get thrown in prison if you don't, or something. This is just the way the world works. Some people are not as grateful. Some people may not look at it in quite the same way. Mm. Let me just go back to the slide. Sorry, got distracted for a moment there. Okay, let's see what else Rinpoche says. Attachment to a good reputation can even disturb us when we try to meditate. Like when we sit in a perfect meditation posture with a mind puffed up by the thought that others must be jealous of how wonderfully we're meditating. Such a mind is not Dharma. And we do have to be careful. I mean, maybe even it happens here that when people come in to chant pujas together, that somebody has a beautiful voice and they can chant really loud, and all they can think about is how wonderful everybody thinks their voice is and their singing is, or what have you. I mean, what kind of practice is that? And if everything that we do is driven by, I want people to think wonderfully of me. I want people to think well of me. I want them to think I'm this wonderful person, practitioner, whatever. Then it really taints our Dharma practice. That's why we do often talk about not being tainted by these 8 worldly concerns, making sure that we don't let them creep into our Dharma practice even, because then it becomes even more despicable. It's bad enough that we follow them in our everyday life, but if we follow them in our Dharma life, where we become totally attached to having everything getting some sort of recognition for who we are and what we do and how we practice and how many times we show up at class and how attentive we are and whatever. I mean, you do it because you want to do it. You don't do it because you want the praise. You want the, good reputation. So we have to be careful on this. Yeah. And Danny shares, oh yes, I know the competitive meditation well from being a Zen monk. Hilarious. I mean, the thing is that this is the antithesis of what we want to do in our Dharma practice. And if we think that while we were sitting there, I have to admit that when my very first retreat I went to wasn't an FPMT, it was with Sogyal Rinpoche, part of Rigpa in 1993. And it was like 500 people all gathered at this amazing facility in Mount Madonna Center in California. Beautiful center. I mean, and there were sitting to my left was a woman, and I think on the other side her partner or whatever, and they were longtime students of Sogyal Rinpoche's. And I have to admit, I was trying to impress them with my ability to hold my meditation posture as long as they did. But was I meditating? Probably not. You know, I think when you enter into the Dharma, you do think it's a bit of a competition. Like somehow I have to be as, rigid in my posture and make sure I don't move my legs as much or make as much noise or whatever the case might be. We have a lot of hangups that can come into our Dharma practice if we start thinking that it's all about what people think about our practice and us as practitioners. And it takes away all of the real joy of it or the real benefit of it. So, of course, the other side of craving a good reputation is craving to be free from a bad one. When people complain about us, criticize us, tell others about our faults and mistakes, even though we may not have the actual faults that they say we have, this can bring a lot of pain into our mind and make us very unhappy. This is caused by aversion to a bad reputation, right? I don't know that I need to say more on this because I've already touched on it, but this is one of the problems as we see with all of these, with all four pairs. If we have an attachment to the one, then we have a strong aversion to the other, which is the opposite of it. We want the material stuff. We don't want to lose it. We don't want to have any loss whatsoever. We want the comfort and the pleasures. We don't want to be uncomfortable and have displeasure in our lives. We want the good reputation. And the more that we hold on to that and attach to that, and we get really bent out of shape when people criticize us. We hear bad things, rumblings. And this is maybe in that category more of praise and criticism than good reputation and bad reputation. But there is that saying that if we hear 10 people talk about us and 9 of them say something good and the 10th person says something bad, where does our focus go? Right on number 10, right? What is wrong with that person? Why are they saying these things about me? Why do they believe that about me? Why do they think that I'm a horrible person? All of our attention goes there, right? And shows how attached we are to it. Otherwise, we'd be able to hear all 10 of them and just say, or to know that there's a variety of views out there. Yeah. Something I've come to accept as a teacher is that, I get praise from people. People say things, I think, good reputation in general. But when you hear something that somebody doesn't like, that Don, not a good teacher, you have to really let it go because it's not so important. It's just part of life, right? Why do we think that everyone that we come into contact with, every situation we're in, whether it be at work or family, whatever, that it's all going to be people who love and enjoy us, who think we're wonderful, think we're the bee's knees or the cat's meow or whatever. That's just not the way life works. So we have to adjust ourselves to that. Yeah, and I'm just pointing out examples from my own role as a teacher, but it's true for all of us, right? If, on the other hand, we don't crave the admiration of others, we don't care when they speak badly of us. Whether they admire us or not, whether we have a good reputation or not, our mind remains undisturbed. Whatever the external conditions, our mind remains equal, tranquil. We lead a life of equanimity. We use this word equanimity in a lot of different ways in Buddhism. But as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of having that even-keeledness that we just go through life, very even-minded, not being so upset when things go bad or when they go good. I'll share the story that I won't go into all the detail of it because I think many of you have heard it before of the Taoist farmer. Taoism, I don't know why they say Taoist. It could be the Buddhist farmer for all I know, but he's, has a ranch and everything. And one day, one of his horses runs away. And his neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, how awful that your horse ran away." He goes, "Who knows what's good or bad?" The next day, the horse comes back, but it comes back with a wild horse. And the neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, your horse came back, and look, brought another horse. Now you have two horses. How wonderful." And the Taoist farmer goes, "Oh, who knows what's good or bad, right?" Then the next day, his son is out there trying to break the wild horse and falls off the horse and breaks his leg. So the neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, how awful that your son broke his leg trying to break the horse." He says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" The next day, the military come through town, taking young men to go off to, young men and women probably, go off to war. And because his son has a broken leg, they don't take him. And so the neighbor comes over and says, "Congratulations, your son was able to stay behind because of his broken leg." You get the gist of it. I mean, again, things do change. That's another part of that whole story, is that nothing stays the same. We can never tell what's kind of right around the corner from any particular experience. But why are we having a mind that imputes all of this goodness onto certain things that produce a pleasurable experience, a wonderful experience, and then we impute such horrible things on something that produces an unpleasant experience? That's purely from our own side. There's just a pleasant feeling and an unpleasant feeling. Really, at some level, they are just feelings. And I pointed that out earlier today. We have a pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling. That's all that they are. They're just a feeling tone. This is what Buddha means by feeling. He doesn't mean the whole range of emotional stuff that we put into feelings when we go to our therapist and talk about our feelings. This is just, what is the tone that is arising in your mind? Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And yeah, it might be unpleasant to hear people say things bad about us, to have a bad reputation. But everything else is imputed on top of that. How we're going to see it, how we're going to feel bent out of shape by it, how we're going to hide in our house for 2 weeks because everybody's been saying negative things about us, whatever the case might be. Some people even take their own lives when they've had a bad reputation, right? I mean, how horrible that they go to that degree of imputing on top of that experience something that causes them to want to end their own lives. But that's a decision that we make in terms of our own minds. It's not something that is inflicted upon us. Yes, these experiences are going to arise. And if we have the understanding that this is our karma causing people to have, say bad things about us, have a bad reputation, well, then we are attentive to that. We do everything we can to repair that and to purify that. We don't let it overcome us and make us, depressed and want to take our own lives. So a lot of pain and suffering when we expect that admiration. If we don't crave it, doesn't matter. We can have that equanimity, that balance. When we cut attachment to having a good reputation, fear of a bad one disappears automatically. Whatever people say, we have no fear. This brings peace into our life, into our heart, and we're able to practice purely. Okay. So that's, again, I think maybe it's bigger than what I sometimes give it credit for, but having a good reputation is important to a lot of people. I think we do see it certainly on the larger scale of celebrities and people who are well known in our society, and how important it is that they hold on to people having a good view of them. Otherwise, their music doesn't sell. Otherwise, their books don't sell. Otherwise, everything, they don't get movie roles. I mean, look at how many people, again, through the process of that, the Me Too thing, which was important to address the abuse that was going on in film and what have you, people who were doing things that were not correct. But, people were very attached to their reputations and suffered so greatly because of that. Shouldn't have done the things they did. Absolutely, that's part of it. And that's why all of that's still quite worthwhile. But this is the tendency we have, always being concerned about what other people think about us. Let me open it up to see if anyone else wants to share anything there about your own assessment of that or experience with that. Anyone? Okay. So again, each of these, as we go through, as I said, maybe just reflect and take note of to what degree is this part of your landscape? Do you have to deal with the ramifications of this in your life in terms of your own attachment to a good reputation, avoiding a bad one? The same for the other two pairs that we looked at. Let's go on then to the final pair, even though we're approaching this with a little bit of time left. Trust me, I've got much more to cover in terms of the ways that we work with uh, ridding our mind of the attachment and desire that is part of all of this. Praise and criticism. So as Rinpoche said, reputation is more in general what people think and say about you. Here are the things that are actually to your face. The ways in which people will say things that make you feel good and inflate your sense of who you are because they're praising all your good qualities, or they're criticizing you and causing you to feel really horrible about yourself. When people praise us by telling us how good, generous, or wise we are, our mind creates problems. Our attachment immediately blows up like a balloon. Like we always want to, keep saying those nice things about me. Can I get a, recording of that? Of course, this is, our mind of pride too. Pride, many of the other delusions, they say, and some of you know this already, but these three root ones that I mentioned that are our reactions to the three feelings, our attachment for the pleasant feelings, our anger towards the aversion towards the unpleasant ones, and this kind of dulling out, ignorant, confused mind in regard to the neutral. All the other delusions arise from those three. So pride is very much about attachment, right? It's an attachment to the view of ourselves. Pride is an interesting phenomenon in the Buddhist studies. When we go into the various mental factors, these are called mental factors, include a variety of things in the mind, and they include these afflictive states, attachment, and so on, and pride as well. Pride is actually set out as one of the 6 root delusions when they expand upon those 3 to include some of the major things that are obstacles in our spiritual practice. And pride is described as having 7 different flavors in the traditional teachings. I'm not going to go into all 7 of them, but we can see how our pride, when we hear things from other people that are positive about ourselves, causes our mind to puff up. Sometimes that's the definition given of pride in traditional Buddhist studies, is the puffed up mind upon hearing good things about our possessions, our body, our mind, whatever, all the various things that people can praise us on the basis of, right? So this puffing up of the mind is a distortion, again, because we have a lot of work to do. I mean, yeah, we've got some good qualities. Yeah, we do things well here and there. But this view that pride has of we're all this amazing, wonderful being, and look at me, don't I smell great? That is not, in line with reality, and it becomes, moreover, an obstacle to our learning from situations and learning from others in particular. If we think that we're so hot and so great, well, then what do others have to offer to us? Nothing. Pride is said to be one of the worst afflictions in terms of our spiritual path. Because if we're driven by that and we continually see ourselves through that lens, we're not going to want to change things. We're not going to want to actually do the deeper work because we think we're already pretty good, I'm pretty good, you're okay. Not I'm okay, you're okay. Pride is this tendency of just not being aware of our own faults then, because we only are honing in on and focusing on the good qualities that others are praising us for. We don't recognize the additional work that we have to do. One of the Lojong sayings that's in the 51, there are 50, there are different numbers of them depending upon the presentation, but the slogans of mind training from Geshe Chikawa. One of them says, of the principal witness, trust the primary one. Meaning that when you have kind of different witnesses of what's going on, you have other people who witness what's happening and going on in your life and how you behave. And then you have yourself as another witness that is knowing what's going on in your life. Well, the way they explain that often is that this means that the primary of these two witnesses is yourself, because you have the greatest knowledge of what it is that you're actually doing. But I always want to put a note on that and say, but that's the degree to which you are self-aware. If you aren't self-aware, then your primary witness might actually be pretty off kilter, maybe pretty unreliable, because you're going to think of yourself through the lens of all that praise that you receive from others and not see yourself truly, not see yourself in terms of the faults that you actually possess. So, in the process of hearing other people criticize us, in the process of trying to be open to that, we do need to have kind of a dual lens. We look at it first from, okay, this person is putting forward a view of me that I might be very blind to, that I need to hear because it's something that's actually pointing out a fault in me that I am not aware of, that I actually need to take to heart and address. On the other hand, there are distorted perceptions. Admittedly, some people may criticize us for something that we didn't do or for something that is misinterpreted or seen in a different light. And in that case, well, then we can be relying upon this primary witness. We can look at it and say, okay, I know from my own thoughts and how I behaved at that time, the things that I said, what I was meaning by what I said, that this is a misinterpretation, that this is someone else not being as accurate in their view of me as I am of myself. I think that takes a bit of development to get to that place where we can be the primary witness, we can be the main one to rely upon. Most criticism is actually very helpful. We're going to see this in some of what Rinpoche shares. You know, if others are always just praising us, well, then what do we think we have to work on? Maybe we've got some self-awareness and we can actually go, okay, I need to work on diminishing my pride. I need to work on diminishing all these other tendencies. But if all we're hearing is good stuff, we never address any of our faults. We need critical people. We need people who are actually going to point out things they see in us that we're blind to. They say that often, right? We all have blind spots. We all have things that we're not seeing. Since there is this danger of the mind getting really puffed up, having this prideful mind when we hear praise, we need to be very careful when being praised. In order to protect ourselves, we have to be keenly aware of what's happening in our mind and use one of the many useful techniques that exist. Well, one of the main techniques they say when you're having a prideful mind is to look at all the stuff that you don't know. And they often use the example of the Abhidharma texts that are taught in the monasteries. We actually studied the Abhidharma Kosha of Vasubandhu at the master's program in Italy, and it's extremely humbling. When you go into it, it's encyclopedic about all the various realms, the desire realm, the form realm, the formless realm, all the various things and aspects of it, all the different realizations. And you come away from it just really belittled by just the enormity of the knowledge that's out there that you don't have. And there's a lot of things that we don't know. We have to be constantly reminding ourselves that we're not as good as what other people see us. I'm not trying to make you become kind of self-loathing or putting yourself down. That's not the objective here. It's to always find a measure so that we don't go outside of this realm of what's really there. If our mind gets puffed up and inflated to this high degree, then we're not going to be blind to what our actual faults are and the things that need to be dealt with. Whereas if we bring our mind down by recognizing what we don't know, what we haven't realized. I mean, one teacher said, even just by realizing that we're not enlightened yet, that should be humbling in and of itself, right? I'm not a Buddha, folks, you know. Say that to ourselves. I'm not there yet. I have a lot of work to do yet. That can be very good at diminishing our pride. So this is one of the dangers, certainly, of praise, on this side of it. Expecting praise or compliments makes us susceptible to disappointment as well. Say we give somebody a cup of coffee or a piece of chocolate, and she doesn't even say thank you, but just takes it without a word. I mentioned this earlier about not getting gratitude or thanks from other people. You know, this is part of this praise mind, right? We want to have people say good things about us. Oh, that Don, he's really generous. He's really kind. He got me this. He got me that, whatever. This is the tendency that we have. And we get disappointed when people don't even thank us, when people walk away without showing their gratitude. So then Rinpoche says this can become a great source of suffering in our mind, a huge problem. It's so very important. For days after that, we scowl at that person and feel completely alone. We go around with a red hot needle in our heart. And of course, who created that red hot needle? That other person didn't. We don't know what was going on for them, that they didn't thank us, or maybe they were dealing with a really difficult situation in their lives and they were just oblivious at the moment. But if that's our expectation, that we need to be praised for every little thing that we do, well, then we're going to be disappointed frequently. But we're the creator of that. We're the one that set that up. Logically, there's no point at all in getting worried, angry, or such. But logic doesn't stop us from suffering. Problems arise because we have failed to destroy our attachment to admiration. Suffering, anger, and the resultant negative karmic actions of body and speech arise from attachment to the happiness of this life. And he's just pointing that out in regard to this particular pair. We have this strong attachment to praise, to admiration, to people thinking good of us. And I'm not in any way condoning you becoming like a pain in the butt for everybody in your life. This is not what we're trying to say. You should be really mean to everybody in your life, and that way you don't have the expectation of getting praise from them. No, be kind to the people in your life. But what is your expectation around that? That they're going to then always want to reciprocate, always want to say thank you, always show their gratitude by doing things for you? That's the mind of attachment. Remember when I was talking earlier about love and attachment? This is where we veer into that. When we look at the people who are in our lives and we do things for them, but we do them with these ulterior motives. We do them because we want to keep getting what they offer to us. Yeah, I'll scratch your back, but you've got to scratch mine. This is just a faulty setup. It's going to lead to problems. It's going to lead to difficulties because that expectation furthers our desire and attachment, as we saw earlier. And it creates problems when we don't get it. We get angry and upset. Why is that person behaving like that? Why is my partner, giving me the silent treatment, whatever? Well, might not know, but why is that expectation there? If we get angry when somebody calls us a dumb animal, this is an interesting point Rinpoche makes here. Why don't we get angry when we say the same words to ourselves? I don't know how often we call ourselves a dumb animal, but we might call ourselves kind of, oh, that's really stupid, Don. That's really a dumb thing to do. But if somebody else says that, if Lou says, Don, that was a really dumb thing to say, and I might feel differently, right? All of a sudden, it's like, oh, this person's criticizing me. But I can criticize me all the time, anytime I want. He says we would if the words themselves cause the anger. So it's completely illogical to get angry simply because they were said by another person. So we would get just as angry at ourselves calling ourselves dumb as somebody else calling ourselves dumb or calling us dumb. This is the words themselves don't have that power. Just as I don't get upset when I put myself down and go, oh, Don, that was really dumb to do, then I shouldn't be getting upset when Lou or anyone else tells me something that I did was dumb. And we have to look at, there's actually a little exercise that Rinpoche put in his teaching around praise and criticism about like how these are trying to see these as just words. And he started off with like saying to yourself how wise you are, how wise you are. And like we start hearing those words. And then when we do the opposite, you're so terrible, you're so terrible, you're so terrible. Well, they're just words. Both of them are just words. Different syllables, different meaning behind those words. I'm not denying that. But at the very basic level, they're just sounds. Just like I was talking about how these are just three feelings of pleasure, displeasure, neutrality. Well, so these two are just sounds. They're vibrations of molecules in the air. We can choose how we're going to look at them. You can give them all the importance in the world. If you think that that's what they are, then you're going to be, again, disappointed when people are saying those negative things to you. But you can choose not to hear them that way. In Tantra is very advanced practice, but they say that ideally we are meant to hear everything as mantra, everything as the mantra of the being that we're practicing. So that whether we're hearing jackhammers on the street when we're trying to read a book, or whether we're hearing the sound of birds in the trees when we're enjoying our time outside, all of it is seen as mantra. We don't get into this is good, this is bad kind of duality. It all becomes the mantra of the Buddhas, the mantra of the practice that we're doing. This is our choice, how we're going to see all these things, whatever experiences that we're having. And if somebody is criticizing us, we can hear it initially through the lens of at least, okay, this is a person offering some advice, some observation on what's been happening in terms of their experience with me. I'm going a little over where I want to go before a break. So I'll stop here with this, but this is our choice. How are we going to look at these words of praise or criticism? There's a little bit more to finish up on this, but let's take our 10-minute break. Otherwise, we're going to run too close into the end of our time together. It's 2:40 here. So at 2:50, we will reconvene. All right. Enjoy your break. Watch your mind. Let's carry on. I just have a few more slides to go through on this last pair of praise and criticism. So let me start with that, because I do want to be able to spend a fair amount of time talking about how we deal with all of this. Just focusing on the awareness of it. The awareness of it is we've already touched on many of the things to be aware of in terms of the faults of all of these 8 worldly dharmas. This is just reiterating something I mentioned before our break. In fact, criticism is very useful. Unlike praise, which causes us to puff up with pride and is therefore an obstacle to happiness and enlightenment, criticism enables us to see our own mistakes and gives us the opportunity to correct, to make our practice pure and perfect. So again, if we hear the words of another who's criticizing us in that lens of this is something that we may be very useful for us to hear, somebody who's pointing out something we might be blind to. The Kadampa Geshes, their reasoning was if we like praise, we should like criticism as well, because both are just words, sound waves hitting our ears, nothing more. And we talked about that. For them, blame was very good. They liked to receive as much criticism as possible. The more they received, the more opportunity they had to practice thought training. Again, shows a good practitioner that they're able to do that. Therefore, they were delighted to be abused because they could train their minds in bodhicitta. Getting angry at those who criticized them, they saw them as extremely kind and felt strong love. Of course, that's the practice that we have to engage in. I don't know if this is going out or not. Maybe Lou's going to get some fresh batteries, but just in case. But yeah, this is what we should be doing in when we start criticizing. Or maybe I'll wait till the battery cutting in and out. Hold on. Okay, testing. Okay, got the batteries changed. Sorry about that. So the true measure of our ability at those times when we're being criticized to practice Dharma to the greater degree is to have compassion for people when they are criticizing us. I mean, that example of that one was more about reputation, but the monk who was in the hall and the woman brought in the baby and what have you. I mean, I'm sure she had compassion for the whole situation. Here's a woman for whatever reason, she's giving me her baby. I'll take care of the baby. I'll do whatever is needed. And if we are able to be compassionate towards those who criticize us rather than suddenly our defenses going up and we start getting angry and upset at them and what have you, that shows us being even greater practitioners, not just letting our mind remain undisturbed, but even going to a healthier attitude, a healthier mind. We're going to talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the importance of motivation and the way that we change our minds at those times into something virtuous, not just neutral and not allowing our mind to be disturbed when things aren't going our way, but how do we actually create a more positive state of mind at that time? So let's carry on so we can get to all of that I'm talking about. Summary. Here's a few summary points from Rinpoche. Here's an experiment, he says. Watch your mind when you meet any of the 4 desirable objects, and especially those that you've already determined in this little survey today that are more prevalent for you. How does it feel at the time? When you look below the surface of the excitement and sense pleasure, you'll see that it's never peaceful or relaxed, but confused, agitated, disturbed. It's lifted up, but it's also uptight, as if gripped by an iron glove. What Rinpoche is pointing out here, excuse me, is that when we have a mind of attachment that's chasing after these four desirable objects, it feels good, right? Because it's going after what is bringing us that pleasurable stuff. It's like our fix, again, giving us exactly what we need to be happy in the moment. We're getting kind of all caught up in that, but that's not really a peaceful state of mind. That's actually a mind that's quite agitated. It's uplifted, but he says it's also uptight. It's also like really, they often talk about, again, when we're trying to focus the mind, that one of the big obstacles is the mind of excitement, the mind that is distracted in this pleasurable way, where we start thinking about wonderful things that we've done or that we'd like to be doing, and it draws the mind away from the moment. Well, it's the same with regard to all of these four objects of pleasure that we are drawn into, is that we get caught up in them because they're producing something that seems to be good for us, pleasure, but it's actually agitating the mind. It's actually making the mind not very peaceful at all. We can see that it's not peaceful on the other side when we have to experience the four undesirable ones. But, this is, as Rinpoche says, the nature of attachment. We're in pain, but it's different from the pain of sickness or from the four undesirable objects. It's the pain of attachment. This is hard to see or control because strong attachment is mixed with our experience of the object. It obscures us from seeing the object's real nature and what is happening in our mind. Of course, by real nature, we go all the way down to the deepest teachings that the Buddha gave on the emptiness of the object, that the objects don't have anything from their own side that makes them what they are, much less how we experience them. Remember, I was talking earlier, I often use music as the example. It's my big object of attachment. But there's music that we play that we really enjoy, but not everybody enjoys that music. Why do we have, I don't know how many different categories? When they do the Grammys, they give out many different categories, right? Of Latin music and New Age music and classical music and this and that and whatever. Even within classical music, you might have very many different types of classical music. Some people may like certain bits of that or this, and they don't like others. Well, that just shows right there that there's nothing inherent within that music or those objects that is beautiful, delightful, wonderful. Everything is rather very unique to our own karma and our own hearing of it and appreciating something about it. Other people may listen to our music and be revolted by it, just as we might be revolted by other people's music. So this is the nature of the deepest nature, is that things do not have any of these inherent qualities that we assign to them. Moreover, they don't even have an inherent identity as classical music or as whatever the case might be. So this is, again, the level of research and investigation that we could go to eventually. But this is the very obvious one, is the pain of attachment that we have in the moment when we are caught up in that object and we don't want to be separated from it. And, all of this just kind of obscures our mind, keeps us caught up in that. It's a very agitated state of mind. Wrapped as we are in desire for the object, we're unable to see that all the worry, aggression, unhappiness, and fear we have in this life come from that desire, which is excessively concerned with the happiness of this life. So the degree of pain that we have when the four undesirable objects arises depends upon the degree of attachment we have to the four desirable objects. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about cutting off desire then and subduing the mind. But before this, let me do a check-in just to see on the last ones that we shared there, especially praise and criticism. Anything anybody wanted to share? There is a comment from Danny in the chat. I went to Zen first because I was attracted to the Tibetan style, but couldn't tolerate the clanging cymbals and the tanglings, whatever, all the different noises made. After Zen practice now, I still don't love all that noise, but it doesn't disturb me anymore. Good. I mean, I do have to admit, with my proclivity for music, I tend to like Western music a lot. And when I hear people playing like Tibetan chanting and some of it, it just doesn't sound that It sounds very dissonant to me and not so, it's not something I put on at home to listen to if I want to relax and listen to music. I hate to say it, but that's just, you know, we have to, again, acknowledge that's our karma, you know. Still, I mean, I will do the pujas and all the chanting and all the things that need to be done and be a part of it, but it is very different. So any other comments about praise, criticism, any of these things we've talked about? I think we've gotten clear, I hope, in the last, 3 hours or so, at what these 8 worldly concerns are and how much they pervade our experience, how much we get caught up in patterns of attachment to getting what we want and not getting what is the other side of the equation. All right, let's talk a little bit about cutting off desire. And Rinpoche has a whole chapter on this in The Door to Satisfaction. I'm going to use a few quotes from that to get us started in our discussion of this. Not following desire is practicing Dharma. Following desire is not practicing Dharma. This is a kind of a conclusion we can come to based on looking at these 8 worldly concerns. It is as simple as that. The whole point of that text he found back in 1974, opening the door of Dharma, these instructions from the holy mouths of the Kadampa Geshes, which they practice and experience, is to cut off the 8 worldly concern or worldly dharmas, to be free of desire, clinging to this life. Okay, but the object itself is not the problem. I've already told you this a few times. This is just Rinpoche reiterating it. Having wealth is not the problem. Getting praised is not the problem. Having a good reputation is not the problem. So what is the problem? The problem is the mind desiring and clinging to wealth. That is the problem. Like the body fastened with chains, the mind is fastened with attachment. The mind is tied, controlled, chained by attachment. The mind is stuck like glue to the object, or like ants in honey. Attachment is the mind stuck to an object. I mentioned this also earlier today, right? That's the feeling even of it, is that we get caught up in it. And as I said, I don't want to make it seem only like this is about the pleasurable stuff that we generally say is the object of attachment. This is also about the attachment we have to avoiding the unpleasant stuff. So when that arises, when we get criticized, we get stuck on that too, right? We get stuck in a different way because we get stuck with the desire to get rid of it, to push it out of our lives. We don't just let it be. There's a certain calmness that comes when we just allow it to be. Oh, there's praise. That's just like water off a duck's back. Oh, there's criticism. That's just like water off a duck's back. You don't get so caught up in it, so attached to a particular view of it as good or bad or whatever. Okay. Desire makes having these 4 material things, comfort. He uses in the book interesting sounds, which means, I guess it was a weird way of translating a good reputation. Praise. That's what makes them a problem, is desire. If there's no desire, no worldly concern, having or not having these objects does not become a problem. The thought of the worldly dharmas clings to the 4 desirable objects of this life. Without this thought, we have calmness and peace in our minds. Again, we talked about that earlier. And then meeting the 4 desirable objects doesn't bother you. Someone praises you, doesn't matter. They criticize you, doesn't matter. Okay, so how do you keep your mind peaceful when problems happen? How do you protect your mind so that experiencing the 4 undesirable things does not disturb you? By realizing that clinging to these 4 desirable objects is the problem. Everything starts with desire. So we have to cut desire. So one of the ways that we're going to approach this, we're going to talk about this first, is you have to realize the shortcomings of these 4 desirable objects when you have desire towards them and abandon your clinging to them. This is the basic psychology. If you use this method, undesirable situations will not disturb you. So let me clarify what I'm talking about here. This is often said to be one of the main techniques that we use in combating any delusion, is we see the shortcomings, the disadvantages if that becomes something that we pursue. And sometimes this really works even well in our worldly life, right? If you go to the doctor and your doctor has all your blood work and they say, hey, I hate to tell you, your cholesterol is really out of control. This is really happening. All of this is not good because it portends that you may have some heart problems and difficulties further down the road. Well, then you start paying attention. Immediately you go, okay, I see the shortcomings of continuing to do what I've been doing, to eat the way I have, to not exercise the way I've been doing, whatever. All of that kind of adds up to, I'm going to make a change. I'm not going to continue doing what I'm doing because I see that it's only going to lead to more problems and difficulties. We've already touched on this a bit today, but this is one of the first techniques that's always used with regard to fighting any of these delusions. So we have to see them for what they are. Remember what I said just a short while ago, desire, it becomes confusing for us when we have attachment and desire to the attractive things because that seems like it's getting us what we want. Right? I want that happiness of that wonderful music playing, that delicious meal. That's going to make me happy. Yes, you do have a happiness experience. We're not denying that there's pleasure there. But does that really ultimately satisfy? That's one of the things we're going to look at when we look at this list of the ways that we can see the shortcomings of following the mind and desire. So there's basically three categories as I could discern from looking at what Rinpoche shared in this section of his writing. He says, first, we have to realize how desire leads only to dissatisfaction and blocks true peace and happiness. Mind of desire is not going to satisfy you. It's not going to get you there. If you feel that by sacrificing desire, you are sacrificing your happiness and are being left with nothing, remember that all your problems are based on desire and the thought of the worldly dharmas. Not knowing that the nature of desire is suffering, you cannot see that there is a better happiness. Remember, I talked about this being the happiness of Dharma. So this is one of the problems for us, I think, is that we do tend to think that if we get rid of our desire and our attachment for all these four pleasurable experiences, that we're left with nothing. Okay, then I don't have anything. Once more, you can still have the four objects in your life without the desire, and you will actually be happier if you don't have that desire. I remember when I did my first meditation class, it was one of these insight classes, mindfulness, vipassana kind of practices, where many of you have done this, where they pass around a bowl with raisins in them and you each take a raisin and you try to eat the raisin mindfully, where you're just really being aware of everything that's happening. And maybe some people find raisins to be unpleasant, because that's possible. But for those of us who enjoy eating a raisin and really the taste of a raisin, sounds kind of weird now, but you just eat the raisin mindfully. I mean, there's something that happens when we are able to experience pleasure without the mind that is constantly looking at, how do I get the next moment of pleasure? How do I make sure I sustain that experience? I mean, if you would look at how you eat a piece of cake, or some delicious dessert, I don't know what everybody likes. Maybe you like pudding, maybe you like, whatever. When you have that in front of you and you're eating it with a mind of attachment, you're rarely even enjoying the experience of the actual cake going on your tongue and the taste sensations that are happening. You're kind of doing that, but you're continually getting the next bite ready to go shoveling in, and the next bite and scraping the frosting off the plate. You're doing whatever it takes to sustain that pleasurable experience, but you're not enjoying the pleasure. I think this is why Lama Yeshe would say, the more pleasure, the better, dear, because there's nothing wrong with the pleasure. But we feel like there has to be the mind of desire and craving to go along with it, or we don't get the pleasure at all. Somehow there's no happiness involved at all. What we're putting forward here is, what is it like to eat a piece of cake, to hear the piece of music, whatever it is that you are involved in, and not have that mind of desire arising? Just be present with whatever that experience is, pleasant, unpleasant, indifferent. It's a practice, but it does come out of our mindfulness. I can't emphasize the importance of having some level of mindfulness. And even though that isn't a primary practice in the vein of the Vipassana tradition and what they do in that variety of Buddhism, it's still very important in our Tibetan Buddhist practice. We have to have some mindful awareness. We have to be able to be present with what is actually happening and not be so caught up in the next moment of that, the next moment of that. That can be already huge. But the other thing I want to point out that's part of what Rinpoche is saying here is, again, this idea of the happiness of Dharma. There's a happiness that comes in a very deep level if we can be with all these experiences without the delusions arising, without the desire for that happiness to continue, without the desire for us to avoid the unpleasant sensation. Peace that comes, an inner peace that is this happiness of Dharma. Happiness of Dharma is when we are actually applying the Buddha's teachings and we're seeing that we are much happier people inside, regardless of what's going on outside, because we have a mind of equanimity, because we have a mind that's not going to get caught up in our habitual patterns. And then, as Lama Tsongkhapa mentions in the great commentary, this is his Lamrim Chenmo, we follow desire in the hope of getting satisfaction, but following desire leads only to dissatisfaction. In reality, the result of following desire is only dissatisfaction. You try again and again and again, that insanity, but there is only dissatisfaction. They say that, if you piled all the enjoyments that we've ever had in all of our lifetimes, it would be as high as Mount Meru, just some astronomical, height. And are you any happier now from all of those things that you enjoyed and experienced? They just in fact, because we've had attachment around most of those, we've only created more dissatisfaction, more problems, more difficulties. This is that line verse that I was going to share with you from Shantideva about this. He says, "For beings long to free themselves from misery, but misery itself they follow and pursue. They long for joy, but in their ignorance destroy it as they would their foe." This is from his very first chapter, the first chapter of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, which is on the bodhicitta and the kind of, what's the word for it? Yeah, the benefits of bodhicitta, what have you. But we shouldn't, when we read the verses like this, we should include ourselves in that. For we ourselves long to be free from sorrow, from misery, but we end up going after it because we keep creating the causes for it. We long for joy, but we end up destroying the causes for joy because we don't actually overcome our afflictions, our desire, and what have you. So this is, again, the pattern that we're caught up in. So we have to first see how it only leads to dissatisfaction and it blocks real peace and happiness. Again, I'm not saying you're going to experience real peace and happiness in that very first moment that you abandon your desire for something. It's going to be painful to some degree to let go of that habitual reaction, because that's what we are so convinced is causing our happiness, our well-being. Let's keep going for more. I want another bite. I want another plateful. I want more of this. I want more of that. We think if we keep all that going, we're going to be just fine. We don't see the pain that we're causing ourselves and the problems we're causing to our future selves by following that desire. But if we begin to see that, we begin to taste more and more and more the peace that comes from not being so agitated by all that stuff. And we can see it in our masters. You can see it in these great teachers. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche was an incredible example. And I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to be with him. He was here in Santa Fe in 2017. But he was just such an exemplar of practice, of not being caught up in worldly stuff at all. I mean, it never was about him. He never say, "Oh, I'd had enough of you people. I need to go take a few days off and go to the beach or something." I mean, that was never anything Rinpoche would even think about doing, much less do. He never had thoughts of self-concern and of following desire. It was always about, how do I benefit others? How do I help others? Again, we're going to talk about this shortly too. That's the mind that ideally we want to replace any of the thoughts we have towards these experiences. How do we make them about others, about benefiting others, rather than about me and all my stuff and my drama? Going up and everything wonderful, and then going down to the depths, and then going back up again and all over the place. Okay, so let's go on to number 2. Number 2 is recall how desire leads to other afflictions and the problems that ensue from them. If it wasn't for our desire for these 8 worldly dharmas and to avoid their opposites, we wouldn't have jealousy, we wouldn't have anger, we wouldn't have a lot of other things arising. Lama Tsongkhapa's quotation about following desire continues. This is again from the Lamrim Chenmo. He says, "Desire brings so many other problems. Through following desire, the mind becomes rough and unpeaceful. Hundreds of problems come from dissatisfaction. When there's very strong desire, it's very easy to become angry, for example, or jealous or prideful. or miserly. I mean, all of these things come from following our mind of desire. So if we cut off the desire, that's why I think, again, the Buddha emphasized desire in that first teaching he gave when he talked about the second noble truth. What is the cause of our dissatisfaction? Our mind of desire. It keeps us moving in that direction of just exacerbating our own stuff. We have to see that it creates the cause for so many other delusions to arise, so many other problems to ensue. So this is a big one. Let's go on to, I think there may be one more slide for this. Anger, jealousy, and so forth arise in relation to clinging. Because of clinging, these other negative thoughts arise. When any of these negative thoughts arise, you create negative karma, the cause of the lower realms, which causes us to experience those future sufferings in those realms. But even in this life, it blocks us from having real peace and happiness. The third way we cut off desire by seeing its shortcomings is recognize how desire keeps us from progressing on the path of Dharma. We are creating our own obstacles. It's like if you were going to run an obstacle course and you added more obstacles to it. There's enough obstacles on the obstacle course to enlightenment without having to add our own, but we are adding our own. We're creating more obstacles to our being able to further our minds on this path and to benefit others. So this is a big one. If we have some concern for our own welfare and moreover for the welfare of others, we should recognize how following desire is a big obstacle to that. As long as we desire comfort, material things, respect, and a good reputation, and as long as we wish to avoid discomfort, not acquiring things, disrespect, and a bad reputation, every action is motivated by attachment, hatred, or ignorance. This means that there are far more non-virtuous actions than virtuous actions because we're driven by those. We need to be very clear about the distinction between Dharma and non-Dharma. We know that anger is negative, of course, but we aren't angry all the time. What really wastes our precious life isn't anger, but attachment, being attached to the 8 worldly dharmas. So again, once we have that attachment, everything else follows. Without clearly understanding what Dharma is, even though we try to practice it our whole life, nothing becomes Dharma because we still have the wrong motivation. The definition of non-Dharma is simply anything that is done for the happiness of this life alone. It is whatever we do motivated by attachment to the 8 worldly dharmas. And again, that's only going to lead to more dissatisfaction. The definition of Dharma is exactly the opposite. Anything done for happiness beyond this life, the happiness of the next life, the happiness of liberation, the happiness of enlightenment. Whatever is unstained by attachment to the 8 worldly dharmas. Okay, I'm going to skip a few of these because the conclusion is that all Dharma practitioners should renounce desire for the comfort of this life. And unless you renounce this life, there's no way you can even be called a Dharma practitioner. Okay, as long as there's desire, no practice of Dharma. So that's, again, kind of moving us in the direction of the next topic, which is it's within this cutting off desire, which is subduing our minds. How do we subdue our minds? Again, I've already talked about mindfulness being a major factor. There has to be some level of mindful awareness, or else what are we tending to? Like, how are you going to be a good shepherd if you can't pay attention to the sheep? And you've got to be able to first have some awareness and some ability to retain your focus where you need to. Be able to tend to our minds. Secondly, we do need to introduce things that are going to help us to overcome the negative tendencies by dismantling the thoughts that they are involved in and replacing them with thoughts that are more constructive and more truthful. And that's the wonderful thing about the Buddhist teachings. He's not giving us something, oh, let's make up just a whole, fabricate something that doesn't have any grounding in reality and pretend that that's what's so. He's saying, look at things more accurately. Look at things more genuinely, more truly. And that will be an antidote in and of itself because we will be seeing things clearly. Many of you recognize this verse. We used to recite it frequently at the beginning of classes, particularly on our Sunday sessions at Thupten Norberling. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Now, all 3 of these practices that are mentioned there are interconnected. But we can say the very base practice that we start with is to stop doing all the things that are harmful to ourselves and others and start doing those things that are much more beneficial. But behind all of those, both of those, and all of our other Dharma practice is subduing our minds, taming our minds. The very essence of this verse is not to commit any non-virtuous actions. Thinking that the source of life's suffering and problems is external is itself the problem. Separating our own mind from the origin of problems and blaming external sources only brings more problems. Let me go forward a few. He says here, it is especially effective to relate the line, subdue your own mind, to the delusions, pride, anger, jealousy, desire, ignorance. Subduing these delusions is the teaching of the Buddha. Not subduing them is not the teaching of the Buddha. So if we're not doing anything to subdue our minds, are we really following the teachings of the Buddha? I'm going to skip a few here. Again, I'll give you the full set of slides that you can look to afterwards. But what he goes on to say, and this is going to move us into this topic of motivation, and that's a much more positive state of mind. By tying our minds to bodhicitta, or something that is positive, you tie up whatever it is outside of you that might be harming you. In this case, he was using the example of dangerous animals, enemies, and what have you. If we tame our own minds, everything else is tamed. So let's talk about this next topic. This is transforming the mind through motivation. How we actually change what we are thinking at those times into something that's much more beneficial. I'm going to take it off the slides and just do this ad lib because I think it's more important with the bit of time we have left. What Lama Zopa talks about is that essentially, if we cull down the Buddha's teachings to three main things, many of you've had teachings on this before, they're called the three principal aspects of the path. The very first one is renunciation. This is kind of a bit of what we've already been looking at today. We need to see samsara for what it is. We need to see the eight worldly dharmas for what they are. We need to see that they are not the source of our ultimate happiness. Source of your ultimate happiness is within. That means that when we have these arising in our lives, when we're eating that delicious food or having that beautiful experience, or the opposite, whatever it is that is going on, we need to see it through that lens of recognizing that this is the nature of samsara, to be unsatisfactory, and to turn towards a greater peace that we can experience. Again, that may take some effort and some time before we have that actual experience of that deeper level of happiness that arises from Dharma. But that's the more important goal, rather than continuing to put all of our energy and attention into things that are not going to bring us any satisfaction. Rinpoche would always joke, he said, that song by that Rolling Stone, I can't get no satisfaction. This is the truth. You can't get any satisfaction in samsara. So if we apply first the mind of renunciation, it means that when we are experiencing these things, we see them for what they are. They're part of the prison of samsara. They're just kind of nice wallpaper on the cell of your prison, the prison cell that you're living in your samsaric experience. It's just decorating things a little bit, but it's not resolving the problem. The goal is to get out of prison. So that's how we would apply the mind of renunciation. The second of these three principal aspects is bodhicitta. That motivation can be brought to mind when we are dealing with these. That means thinking of others. That means thinking about their happiness, their well-being. As I pointed out earlier, these eight worldly dharmas are very much caught up in self-centeredness, self-cherishing, me, myself, and I, me getting what I want, me avoiding what I don't want. But when we have a pleasant experience, what's to stop us from thinking about others? What's to stop us from thinking about others who could benefit from, even if we're experiencing the joy of that, we can think of offering it to others. We can think about that helping us to open to what all beings want, their happiness, their well-being. And when we experience something that is painful and difficult and challenging for us, we can then transmute that and think about the pain that others experience. In the same way we want to be free from that at that moment, there are many beings who want to be free from their suffering. We can think about furthering our motivation of bodhicitta at that time through that, wanting to be connected to the happiness that others seek, wanting to be connected to the suffering they wish to avoid. We then get connected to the mind of bodhicitta that wishes to help beings accomplish that by becoming a Buddha ourselves. Rinpoche emphasizes this second principal aspect a lot in his teachings. And one of the most powerful ways that he does this is through introducing the idea of cultivating bodhicitta in everyday activities, what he calls bodhicitta mindfulness. Let me put this on the screen. I'm going to put this document out there too, so you can have this. This is from some advice that Rinpoche actually got from a sutra that he then expanded on based on teachings from his teachers and so on. He gives a kind of explanation of the idea at the beginning, but it's kind of bringing bodhicitta mindfulness to some of our everyday kind of neutral activities. And then we can bring them even to when we're experiencing something that might cause non-virtue to arise. We can transmute the mind at that time. So he says, for example, let's go to when you go to sleep. When you go to sleep, which is something we do every day, right? May all sentient beings achieve the Dharmakaya, meaning the wisdom mind of a Buddha. When you wake up, think, may all sentient beings achieve the holy body of a Buddha. And what I would encourage you to do with this, because it goes through a whole variety, a list of different things when you're bathing, washing, brushing your teeth, um, putting on scent, perfume, cologne, whatever, dressing and putting on and releasing a belt. I mean, putting on any kind of ornaments, jewelry, what have you, washing and cleaning in your house, washing dishes, doing laundry. I mean, it covers everything. I mean, my gosh, if we were to practice this in total, all of these activities, we'd be having a lot of virtuous thoughts throughout our day. That's the point of it. But what I would encourage you to do is take one or two of these to start with. Maybe think, okay, I do dishes every day. Well, I'm going to try to change my mind every time I do dishes to think about, let me put that one back on the screen. It has to do with kind of washing away all the afflictive states of mind of sentient beings. I think that's it right there. I'm washing away all the stains of delusions of all sentient beings. You know, when you're using a vacuum, a broom, a brush, a duster, I'm cleaning away the negative karmas and defilements of all sentient beings. Now, you're not really doing that at that moment, right? You're dusting your house or cleaning your dishes, but you're trying to transmute those activities into something virtuous. Then, when you experience delicious, delightful food, you can even think about through this, you know, may I'm bringing all beings to the happiness that is their ultimate happiness they can experience. Or when we have something unhappening, think I am removing the suffering of all beings, just as I'm experiencing this suffering. And this is how we transmute our mind. The final one of these three is the wisdom of emptiness. And that is a big topic that I don't have time to discuss, but we've already touched on it briefly. To try to think at those times when we are experiencing the eight worldly dharmas, these phenomena that are causing us to have pleasure or pain, that we actually are being aware of the lack of this truly existent I, this inherently existent I that we think is real here, that is not real in the way that we think it is at all. It does exist, but it's not real in the way that we think it is. And that's a whole set of teachings that I'm sure you've all had some exposure to, the emptiness teachings. And we have to repeatedly go to emptiness teachings and meditate on emptiness frequently to be able to apply it. So my advice would be to work with the first two. Try to see these experiences of the eight worldly dharmas through the lens of renunciation, that they are not the answer. Yes, they're going to be in our lives and they give us some measure of pleasure, but don't look to them and put all your money on them because they're going to fail you. And bodhicitta, think of others at that time. We enlarge what we are experiencing. You're still going to have the pleasure of eating that ice cream or whatever. You're still going to have all the various experiences in your life, but you're going to transmute them, change them in that way. I wanted to share some of the last verses or pages that I had on Rinpoche saying we have to practice Dharma. There's no choice, but I'll let you read those on your own. I knew I was preparing more material than I possibly could cover, but that's my habit. So, questions or comments? I have room for a few before we conclude today. I won't go too far over, I hope. But okay, so again, just as a recap. Oh, Tony has something. Sorry, Tony, didn't see your hand up there. Lou's bringing the microphone to Tony. Tony's going to say something. Great.
So Don, at the beginning, you brought up the Taliban blowing up the Buddha statues.
Yes, yes.
And that's been revolving in my mind, and I thought back, oh, that had to be a few decades ago.
Uh-huh.
And indeed it was. So
Yeah.
I looked it up. In March of 2001, both statues were destroyed by the Taliban following an order given on February 26, 2001 by Taliban leader Mullah Muhammad Omar. We all remember him. To destroy all the statues in Afghanistan so that no one can worship or respect them in the future.
Uh,
Buddha Dharma is imperishable. It was never born. I was right here, approving it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Taliban started selling tickets to the ruins to profit from it.
To profit from it. Did they really? I didn't know that part of it.
The Taliban is very capitalistic.
Yeah, they are actually. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Tony. Yeah. No, and I mean, we even think about the last words that the Buddha gave. You know, he said he was passing away, passing into nirvana, parinirvana, and he said, you know, this is life is impermanent. This is the one thing. If I don't get anything from else that I taught, remember that life is impermanent. And then he went on to say, work out essentially your liberation, your salvation for yourself. You know, on the basis of just everything that the Buddha gave, which is there as a truth for us to work with. That is imperishable. That truth will always be there at some level, regardless of whether people are teaching it or not, whether there are Buddha statues or not. It's all there to be discovered and to be practiced. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah. You have to be careful we don't get caught up in too much attachment to all of this. It is our way, the path that we are following, but have to have, yeah, kind of that respect for others as well. So, all right, let's conclude then if there were no other comments. So again, to recap, I hope this is beneficial. We've spent a bit of time. If you want to spend more time on this topic, Rinpoche's book is excellent because he goes into way beyond just the explanations of these and gives more advice about Dharma practice and what have you. But really take to heart, I hope, what I shared with you from his words, that this is really crucial. Crucial according to Lama Atisha and Dom Tompa and Lama Zopa and all these great masters have said, if we don't give up this life, if we don't abandon these worldly dharmas, again, attachment to them, not continuing to go after them, crave them, desire them, what have you, then we're never going to be Dharma practitioners. We're never really going to do what this life affords us, which is to create the causes for more ultimate happiness, especially the happiness of liberation and enlightenment. And in line with that, let's dedicate now for the attainment of enlightenment through what we have done here today. So let's put these dedication verses that we'll recite together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May may the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then the prayer for His Holiness's long life and his wishes to be fulfilled. As we recite that verse, think that we're creating the causes for all of our other teachers who are still here with us in this world to have good health, long lives, and for everything that they aspire for to come to fruition immediately. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then we'll do the prayer for Rinpoche's swift return. Let's 3 verses or 4 verses on this, but let's do this with really heartfelt aspiration for the welfare of all, not just so we can have Rinpoche back in our lives in the FPMT, but for the benefit of all beings. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding, oops, I've got something blocking my view, it's not blocking yours. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings who suddenly departed to peace, what a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Okay, and then let's dedicate for all the beings that we're holding in our heart right now. And this is, although we always are dedicating for the welfare of all beings, it's important that we work with what's in our lives. Those beings whose situation moves us, whether we know them or not. Maybe some of us are really moved by what's going on in Gaza and the suffering that's happening there, or other parts of the world where there's great suffering. But no doubt we all have individuals in our lives as well who are experiencing obstacles, illness, maybe who have died recently or who are even dying at this time. Send this positive energy out to these beings and kind of give it away freely. We don't need to hold it on for ourselves. The way that it actually profits is by giving it away, wanting others to have the fruition of those positive effects in their lives. I think that it removes all of their suffering immediately and brings them all the causes of true peace and happiness. And may all beings experience true peace and happiness, complete freedom from suffering through what we have done here today. Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you, Sheila, for being online to do the Zoom monitoring, and again, Lou here in the Gompa. I will once more give the handouts, the one document I just mentioned, the Cultivating Bodhicitta Mindfulness, as well as the slides to Venerable Dundrup, who will have them out there at some point on the page for this course. So you can always go back to the calendar, click on that. That'll take you to the materials, well, to the page where you can access the materials. So, okay, thank you all. Have a good rest of your day. I'll see you all again soon. Be well. Okay.
Thank you
bye-bye.